Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Well, first of all, I wanted to thank Bitcoin Magazine and Bitcoin Conference 2019 for having me. It's been a great event, and I think a very timely event as well. I'm speaking about Bitcoin transaction batching and less about the folly of Ethereum. I kind of went all in on the clickbait title for the talk. And Bitcoin transaction batching, I think, is a strategy that big players in the Bitcoin ecosystem can use in order to lower the miner fees that we all pay. So several times throughout 2017, Bitcoin reached an all-time high in transactions on the network in a single day. On May 6, 2017, it reached a then all-time high of 375,000 transactions. The nominal output was approximately 2.5 billion, and the average transaction fee had reached about $1. By early the following month, June 2017, average fees had increased to $5.66 per transaction on average. Yet, in a prior period between January 1st, 2014 and January 1st, 2017, fees per transaction had never gone over a weekly average of 31 cents. By the end of 2017, average fees were $48 on a weekly basis. During the crypto winter, however, fees fell back down to below $1. During the preceding period, as the transaction fees rose, Bitcoin's mempool, which is the pool of unconfirmed Bitcoin transactions on the network, had become congested due to the amount of transactions being sent. These transactions are mostly by exchanges, payment processors, mining pools, and even coin mixers. Batching was increasingly seen as a solution. So I think we go forward. Okay, so just to look at what is batching. It's the process of including multiple outputs in a given transaction. So you can see it's better for institutions than individual users. They'll save more. There's no need to pay multiple people using a new transaction, instead make one transaction to pay unlimited amount of recipients. So instead of making 50 transactions to pay 50 different people, you can make one transaction and have 50 different recipients. To pay 50 people, don't make one transaction with one output each 50 times, thus paying the construction fees for 50 different transactions. Instead, make one transaction with 50 outputs. So since Bitcoin's release, this has been a function of the core protocol. You could combine multiple Bitcoin transactions into one. This can significantly reduce the amount of V-bytes or virtual bytes that these transactions use, thereby freeing up block space. By using batching, more transactions can be sent on the blockchain. Batching entails multiple transactions bundled into one transaction ID and transferred over the blockchain together, very much like how the USPS works. This reduces the aggregate number of Bitcoin transactions on the network. Senders can thereby spend less on miner fees. The more Bitcoin transactions that are batched, the lower the mining fee for confirmed transactions for all participants on the Bitcoin network. Large institutions sending many Bitcoin transactions can save transaction fees by using payment batching, especially if they're using Bitcoin Core or other full nodes with similar APIs to Bitcoin Core. A researcher, David Harding, in a post on Medium, found that 10 payments combined together took up just 25% of the byte size of 10 payments made separately. That's a 75% savings in bytes. There is no hard-coded limit on how many transactions can fit into a single Bitcoin blockchain block, but there is a limit on bytes. So how does Bitcoin transaction batching work? Bitcoin transaction batching entails combining multiple outputs into one transaction. Instead of one transaction to one person, such as Alice sends a transaction to Bob and then sends another transaction to Charlie, Alice instead sends to Bob and Charlie in the same transaction. Let's say the fictional Bitcoin exchange wanted to send 50 different transactions with one output each. Instead, it can make one transaction with 50 outputs. So these are the structures or the transaction construction. In the first, you see a non-batched. In the second, you see a batched transaction with 3 people. This is a functionality in the Bitcoin Core wallet. You're able to add these recipients. It's a graphical interface. So the send to address, this is the call that is used when you're sending to one recipient. And then you see the send many. This is the call used when you're sending to many. Here's a timeline of when exchanges began batching. So many wallets support this, Bitcoin Core. So if they're using Bitcoin Core, they are able to do this, and we're able to do this when transaction fees increased. The send many RPC creates and broadcasts a transaction which sends outputs to multiple addresses. Each transaction has a fixed amount of overhead, that is, a certain megabyte size. And the larger the megabyte size, the higher the fees. Transactions can have virtually unlimited inputs and outputs. The record last I checked in Q1 at some point is 20,000 inputs and 13,000 outputs. Each transaction must have at least one of each. The input takes up most of the space because it includes the pertaining digital signature. Outputs comprise generally 15% to 30% of the space in the transaction. So therefore, the quickest way to save when sending transactions is to use fewer inputs. Generally speaking, one transaction takes at least 79 virtual bytes under normal circumstances. If Alice pays Bob in one transaction and then makes a second separate transaction, that's a total of 158 V bytes. If Alice used one transaction, she can get that down to 79. The percentage of transaction fees saved increases as more payments are included in a single transaction. According to Bitcoin programmer Jameson Lobb, Bitstamp, HitBTC, Kraken, local Bitcoins were early adopters of this functionality. You can see this timeline, which is available on Medium, thanks to somebody who goes by Housefly. Brian Armstrong, the CEO of Coinbase, tweeted in January 2018 that Coinbase is working on batching transactions, SegWit, and a number of other strategies to improve transaction backlog. Thanks for bearing with us. I believe at this point they have done that, but don't quote me on that. For an exchange like Bitcoin, as Jimmy Song mentioned, it would be pretty hard to implement this when you have so many customers. It would be a big project. Bitcoin's UTXO model makes this possible. It means you don't actually hold your balances, but rather simply control UTXOs. When you send Bitcoins, assuming you control your private keys, your wallet selects at least one UTXO, which makes up the input of the Bitcoin transaction. These should add up to the amount you want to transfer. If they don't, then you actually receive the input that has no output back in a function called change output. So this is sort of like when you go to pay for a dinner with a $50 or $100 bill, $50 tab, you receive the change back. If you want to send 25 BTC to the output, to the recipient, but the input is worth 50, so you're sending 25, the input's worth 50, 25 actually gets created as a second output and is returned back to you. Every Bitcoin transaction must reference the funds being spent and provide proof that the transaction was authorized by the owner. So therefore, the input takes up more space because it contains the digital signature for your sent funds. The aforementioned David Harding, in an experiment he did, saw the cost of a payment drop more than 50% after 5 outputs or recipients were added to the single Bitcoin transaction. He also examined block 480,000 and found that the actual total size of all transactions was 997,883 bytes, and if they were all batched, it would have been 907,839 bytes. So that's a savings of 90,044 bytes, or 9%. And this was done with a price of roughly $4,500, and also I think in 2018. So these numbers would change based on the market. So the phenomenon has led to websites like outputs.today. It is tracking transactions per day. It has here's a comparison of confirmed transactions per day from blockchain.com and outputs.today. And you see there's over 1 million outputs on April 23rd, 2019, but only about 325,000 actual transactions. So outputs.today, to quote them because I think this says it nicely. It says, outputs per day is a better indicator of overall economic activity on the Bitcoin blockchain than transactions per day. Since one transaction can include multiple outputs, the number of total outputs is more important than the number of the transactions themselves. Large players in the Bitcoin space use batching, the process of including multiple outputs in a given transaction, to reduce their overall transaction fees. Therefore, looking at only transactions misses an important part of the picture. Thank you.